storytelling, of character development and gameplay. And with every iteration, Square brought us to a new world full of rich and intriguing characters. This past year, over 200,000 Japanese gamers have ventured online for another amazing leap in gameplay. Final Fantasy XI. And now, the first and only fully online Final Fantasy title is coming to America.
So I was sort of a weirdly, like I've liked video games all my life, but I was sort of a late to the party kid in the 90s, where I didn't have a home console until a PS1, like late in its life cycle, I think. And so my first Final Fantasy was just seeing FF10 on the PS2 and freaking out at the FMVs and then getting into it that way. So I was a stan of that, but sort of in the way where you're a fan of something because you don't know a lot of other things. And so I was just more of a PlayStation fan, I guess, than anything else. And so I would get PlayStation's magazine, the OPM. And the one really good thing about that magazine was that they had really great demo discs every issue. And I would just play the bejesus out of those. And eventually, I remember I read somewhere that they announced 9, 10, and 11, or was it 10, 11, and 12 at the same like press conference? And I didn't know about that at the time, but the point was it kind of came in as a bit of a whirlwind. So there was this disc that had this, like they called it a documentary, but it was really just a series of these 3 promotional videos talking about Final Fantasy XI online and sort of the design ethos and all that stuff. And I remember just getting super excited because I knew kind of that there were internet video games, but it was not something I knew much about at all. And then, I knew more about MMOs from knowing that Dot Hack Sign was an anime about a cool premise than I knew about. I don't think I knew anything about EverQuest really, and there was that other one I can't remember the name of. Maybe it was Lineage, one of those where I kind of knew what it was, but it felt more like disconnected in my child head than it probably was. I didn't know how persistent the world was, but these videos made 11 look like this. It's like a real world and it's there all the time when you're not there, and that just blew my mind as a kid. It was the coolest thing ever, and I already really liked Final Fantasy and the aesthetic was great, so I was anticipating it like crazy. I almost got I was very close to, in fact I think I bought it and had to return it, the whole super expensive package for the PS2 where you had to get the hard drive, and I'd already bought a network adapter, and it was only after I realized that I'd need a good working PS2 keyboard and a way to actually get a cable to my machine upstairs where I had it, that eventually I just sort of cracked and I looked up the system specs, and it turned out that the family laptop could run it. So that was how I got into 11, and I played it on that crappy little HP laptop, and it ran honestly better than it should have. But it was just this thing where in my head I had already decided that it was like the coolest thing ever, and then when I played it, I was not disappointed, but I remember first getting into it. I guess my first fond memory would be that when I got into it, the controls were not, especially on keyboard, they were not intuitive at all. I remember that I could figure out how to type words, but I could not figure out how to move. And so in the very first minute of me playing the game, I had to ask a passerby how you move by default. And they told me that, and they told me to change what kind of keyboard layout to use, because there were like the 3 sizes or whatever in the config. And then from there, that was kind of the first taste of what I think today is still kind of the lasting impression that I have of Final Fantasy XI, which is that its community was really good. But most of the people that I saw in it were just always willing to help each other. They were all pretty social, within reason. And if you ask them a question, they'd actually stop and type you back. To center in on fond memories, when I think about memories of the game, I don't actually think about fond ones most of the time. Most of my memory of Final Fantasy XI is like this wistful melancholy. I was like a pretty young player compared to all the people that seemed to be doing well in the game. I had a lot of time, but I wasn't on it 24/7 like like some kind of college age, players might have been. And so I was in this sort of limbo of not being super good at it, not being able to plan things out very well. And so the scope and like the size of the world and the game world seemed basically infinite to me. When I saw people who were actually playing the end game, they were kind of like these legendary figures almost. It was like um people that I might never actually get to, and I'll be honest, I never did get to end game anything. The highest level I ever got to was like in the 50s, because I would keep stopping it because it would kind of make me sad, or I'd run out of time for it, or I'd kind of get distracted, and then a year or two later I'd be back because nothing else left that impression. And so yeah, I would have memories of like fruitlessly hunting Leaping Lizzie, or I would have memories of like fun parties in the dunes, but then they'd end badly. Or funny stories of training mobs chasing us in big groups, and then everybody else waiting around the zone having to kind of evacuate, or call in, call in the heavy artillery, somebody that was higher level than the people that were there to get experience in that area. And honestly, it was just a lot of experiences of making slow, steady progress. And over again, it was always that there was some big brotherly figure who would step in and help. And I guess that at the end of the day, what makes the game special to me is that it felt like a real world that was hostile enough that you had to rely on other people, or at least, rely on the economy that was mostly made up of what other players were doing. And then, request help. Like, there were quests that you would have to get in a town like Norg, which is tucked away in the jungle, and the map is basically useless to get there. And you'd have to follow somebody who just knew the way, or look something up and, okay, you have to have silence in this cave because everything detects by sound, and hug one wall, and then you can get there. That was one of the things that I remember the most clearly, even without ever looking it up, is just this, the challenge of finding Norg. But everything was like that. It was, I needed some small amount of money to, get a gear piece before I started leveling up, and I'd, borrow it and pay somebody back later, or, I need help with a mission, and some people in the link shell would help get it together, or, wanting to do the Eco Warrior quest, the one that everybody takes 18 people to, and just sort of remembering it was one of my first experiences as a kid of having to sort of have faith in something that wasn't necessarily going to work, and having to deal with people who would, how do I put it? That trying to start a big group of strangers to do something, seeing how challenging that could be. It was like gathering volunteers, because somebody might join the group and see, oh, you've only got 3 people so far. I don't think that I can stick around for the rest of this, and they'd leave. But what they don't know is that they're the 5th person to do that. We could have 8 people already. And it would, it drove me nuts, but it was such a formative memory. This world that was like too big and too difficult for me to deal with, but also full of people that would help you if you asked. And I think that's kind of what's special about it. It was a game that was big and expensive and pretty to look at and really fun a lot of the time, but also just kind of crushing and frictive, and it just felt like a real place. Like, there were some places you didn't want to go to because it wasn't worth it to go to them more than once, or there's nothing valuable there. Not everything is evenly distributed, and the dangers were kind of all over the place. So, you would spend time stuck, just sort of, chilling in one of the main cities, doing little things around that. And when you finally did have an excuse once in a blue moon to go do something big or cinematic, like I think one of the most was finally doing like Chains of Promathia stuff, the where you go into that kind of eldritch dimension, that's attached to all the telepoints, and doing Primivion's boss fights and stuff like that. Like, again, not even that deep into the game at all, but it was just this, but it felt so much bigger because 99% of the time you're just kind of living a day-to-day life where, money and needs and danger were kind of present. So yeah, it was a game that what I've been telling people for years about why I can't stop thinking about it, even though I've played games that are mechanically more satisfying, games that are better for group play, or better quote unquote, games that have better quality of life, or make more sense or respect my time more, is that it's a game that made me feel small. And I think that good games make you feel like you're having a good time, but great games that you can't stop thinking about make you feel small. Really difficult games, or bleak games, or just games that feel bigger than they are because they do this kind of thing that FF11 does. So I think that that's kind of everything in a nutshell. I don't really remember individual stories that much, but I remember these trends, and I remember what it was like to be really young and feeling sort of lost in real life, and also feel lost in a video game, to have like an escape that wasn't really an escape at all, and that really stuck with me. And it's also probably completely responsible for me being a really good typist, and that is a marketable skill. And so I will posit that as a positive of my time with the game. But yeah, I think that's basically it. It's kind of just felt like a real place, and it felt huge. With Japanese players being in the mix, it felt even bigger, because a lot of them were even more endgamey than your average Western player would be. It was almost like, I don't know, it's funny, having Japanese players in the game did what like Alliance and Horde did for WoW, but like organically. Like these are people from another place that speak a different language, that you can't really understand most of what they're saying. They're kind of in their own little world. It would be like, I don't know, it's like it's weird. It almost sounds like Orientalist to say it, but I thought of them like elves, because they spoke a different language than me, and they were kind of like more ethereal. And they'd been in the game longer, so it was like they were older. It was like this whole weird vibe. It wasn't just the fact that there were people in the game that would help you out because they remember what it was like. And I think that was the main reason people help each other out, because they remember being in a spot where it's like unreasonable to ask them to do something that they need to do, and somebody else helps them, and it's a very pay it forward kind of situation. And then but on the flip side, I think that it wasn't so much that would happen, it was that it would happen so much. It made things feel more connected and universal between people's experiences than in other games. So yeah, that's where I'd leave it, I think.
Final Fantasy XI has redefined the RPG genre and opened an entirely new realm in video gaming possibilities. Online play, transoceanic gamers, a transcending soundtrack, and updating features that continually present new material. With this game, technology has been seized and a new pinnacle has been reached.